We are live. If you're looking for basketball in this show, I'm sorry, you're not going to find it. We have a very special guest in the house today. We have the head honcho, Mark Rogers himself. Mark, welcome to Indiana Hoosiers Live 36.
Well, it's great to have you guys on board at the Voice of College Football, first and foremost. If anyone's familiar with what we were doing with the Indiana channel prior to you guys coming on board, certainly we were just starting, just getting it ramped up, just putting some content out there, and you guys have just been exceptional about being consistent with the live content, with the recorded content, and more important than that, the quality of the content. So we've seen the numbers increase based on you guys and your commitment to the team, the commitment to the fans, the commitment to the content. And so thank you for making it pay off. And I'm excited to see what not just happens with Indiana football during the season on the field, but also what you guys are going to do with this and how your community is going to respond.
We appreciate the words. Absolutely. And yeah, we're excited for the platform and just to be able to, have this outlet to talk to people about Indiana football every week, especially with, we would be doing this anyway, talking to each other across the phone. So it's like to be able to have these conversations out in front of other people who think the same way we do has been really exciting. So like, we're excited we're in the dead period right now, technically, but there is no off season here at the Voice of College Football.
There's no off season. We should probably, I don't know. That's a good idea. Maybe add that as a tagline.
There is no off season.
We're full of ideas here. I wanted to start off kind of with like an Indiana Hoosiers Live, I guess, reoccurring segment. Kind of started back in the Sigs Inside days, but Brad, obviously from the West Coast, Pac-12 guy, lots of football knowledge up in there. So we would run the Pac-12 memory of the week. And so Brad's got a name for you.
Yeah, it comes a little, usually we bake it in organically, but it was coming around a lot on the feed today was Marcus Tuiasosopo, first ever player to get 300 passing yards and 200 yards rushing in a single game. Did it against Stanford. And yeah, I just want to shout him out. Former interim head coach for Washington himself, after the Sark departure. And I just want to give him a little shout out. One of the OG dual threat quarterbacks out there. Pac-12 memory of the week.
With a little bit different of a voting outcome by AP writers and the coaches poll, more college football fans would be aware of Marcus Tuiasosopo today because there's certainly an argument that he should have been quarterbacking in a national championship game in the year 2000 when his team beat Miami head-to-head. And there was a three-way tie of sorts to line up opposite Oklahoma for the 2000 national championship game, BCS title game. And Miami, Florida State, and Washington were all 11-1. And so Miami beat Florida State, but Washington beat Miami. So who do you think the BCS spit out? Well, of course, Florida State. So a lot of Husky fans can argue, and rightfully so. And I bring this up to Miami fans all the time because they'll run down, we could have done this and we could have done that, and this could have been another championship, and they bring up 2000 all the time. And we beat Florida State, we should have been in that game. I went, no, wait a minute. Washington and Marcus Tuiasosopo went 11-1 as well.
Yeah, you could argue maybe that was the first domino to start what is now the College Football Playoff Committee. You could argue as that being probably year 3 of the BCS era, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Funny how we got here. All because of Marcus Tuiasosopo.
I'll maybe when we start talking about the book, I'll give it 1998 a bit of a shout out from a Big Ten angle as well. The very first year there was controversy and a difficult selection right out of the gate.
Well, I mean, if it's just going to lead into it, let's just roll with it. Let's talk about the book, Disputed National Champions. Like, where did the idea come from? Obviously, you're a college football junkie. So how did you end up from like staring at the 2000 national championship going like, that's not right, to Disputed National Champions?
Yeah, well, I'm the guy that, I don't know what you want to call me, athlete / nerd, both combined. I guess there are some of us out there, but I was a guy in high school that played athletics. I played football, played baseball, but I was also a nerd. I was also the guy that, man, I don't know if you guys have heard the stories. There used to be a Sunday newspaper. You get a Sunday newspaper And
I used to read the Sunday paper.
there you go. Okay, you guys have a few years on you, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah,
We got people running. We got people running around that look about your age range, but a few years younger that don't remember these things or never lived through it. But the Sunday paper would come out, and it just so bothered me that I was a huge baseball fan, that the baseball stats that were printed every Sunday in the newspaper were through Friday. They didn't include Saturday's box scores. So I'd sit there with a notebook on Sunday and add Saturday's box scores to the rest of the stats to update them perfectly to Sunday. So I was that guy. And with college football, I wrote like a 12 or 14,000 page manifesto when I was like 16 years old, why college football needs a 16-team playoff. So this is like in 1985, I'm doing this. So I was always interested. It struck me pretty early in my fandom in college football at like 8 or 9 years old that New Year's Day was amazing. Everything culminated on New Year's Day, but why is number 1 playing number 7? Why is 2 playing 4? 3's playing like 14. What are they doing here? That doesn't make any sense. It didn't take me long to figure out and catch on to the whole conference affiliation. And most of us bought into it, thought it was great. Hey, Rose Bowl, Sugar Bowl, and the regional hookup there. But it caused a lot of issues. So I was starting to question these championships from a very early age because you have a very few number of years that are just clear cut. Like they're the champion, they're undefeated, or an 11-1, 12-1 team that just clearly won the right games and boom, put a cherry on top at the end of the year. You go from year to year and I'm talking pre-playoff. Obviously the playoff has cleaned up a lot and I have very little issue since we went to a 14 playoff in 2014, but I'm not the type guy that just takes status quo and, the authorities say this is what it is, that they must be accurate. It must be fair. It must be equitable. Not necessarily. And so I always question these things.
So real quick, before we get into a couple more specifics, do you get into the 1945 national title in the book?
No. So this is a 1990s book. So Disputed National Champions, everyone. I believe the link's down in the description section of this video, all the videos, or you can just go on Amazon and look up Disputed National Champions. So this is the 1990s. And the reason I chose the 90s is I did have a thought that I would continue and go through and do a book per decade and keep it nice and clean and build volumes out. And I basically chose the 90s for 2 reasons. For a marketing standpoint, I just thought it's far enough in the distance that it's nostalgic for a lot of people at a certain sweet spot, but it's also not the 1940s where people are not connected to it, attached to it. So I thought it was a sweet spot from a marketing standpoint, but much more than that, this is the decade that I consider to be the most formative, the most impactful in the history of college football in terms of how we determine a champion. Because as you guys know, the AP poll came out in 1936. The coaches poll about 10 years later. I always forget the date. It's about 10 years later. So from that time up until 1990, nothing ever changed. Now the bowls and the way they were factored in changed, but in terms of just those same institutions just voting for the national champion and everyone taking it, nothing changed. In the 1990s, there was the most just revolutionized the sport from the standpoint of somebody finally saying, okay, let's get 1 and 2 together at least. But of course, the Big Ten and the Pac-10 at the time were like, no, we're playing a Rose Bowl, so don't include us. So it took a few more years to get those 2 conferences. And then obviously we moved from a concerted effort to get 1 and 2 involved to then implement the BCS. And obviously that was then the forerunner of a playoff. So I just considered the 90s to be a great decade to start.
I couldn't agree more about how the 90s were super, transformative for the sport. I mean, you talk about the Nebraska teams, just to get a little nostalgic. I mean, Washington and Colorado were back in their days. UCLA was, a team that I grew up following. They were really good back in the 90s. You'd mentioned 98. They dropped that rescheduled game to Miami to drop out of the national title. Who knows where that program would be if they win that game? It's just, super formative year in terms of just revolutionizing where college football is today. And like we talked about before, 2000 was kind of that domino to start what is, the College Football Playoff Committee now.
Think about this, guys. 1998, Tennessee was number one. Now, how they arrived at number one, they were undefeated, so they were a clear number one. However, if you watched the season, it was one of those high wire acts. Like they needed Clint Sterner, the Arkansas quarterback, to fumble without anyone hitting him at midfield to turn the ball over to give them an opportunity to win the game with like 90 seconds. Arkansas is just running the ball out. And that happened. There was a phantom pass interference call against Syracuse that was on fourth down. Ball game's over, the whole deal, first game of the season. But Tennessee made it through. They're undefeated. But who plays Tennessee? There were 6 teams that were 11-1. How do you choose between Ohio State, Florida State, Wisconsin, Arizona, UCLA? I'm missing someone that's 11-1. But of course, that's what had to be done. Choose the team. And the quirkiness of the BCS formula was so strange that Florida State got to go in 1998. They had the worst loss of everyone. They lost to a 6-5 Michigan or Florida State team. Ohio State was consensus number one most of the season, dropped to Michigan State. And so that did knock them out eventually. And what's quirky about the BCS system is that the Ohio legislature just that year forced Ohio State to start playing in-state schools, one per year. And that was the first year that took effect. And they had to play Toledo, who was atrocious that year. And that actually has been proven that schedule strength decline of playing Toledo knocked them out of the national championship game. Even though they beat them 59-0, that cost them going to the national championship game.
And I'll
That's
throw
crazy.
this one at you. UCLA was undefeated going into that Miami game. They had the most recent loss. Maybe that had something to affect it too. Miami wasn't as good as maybe they were usually that year, but still lost 45-42 to a solid Miami team, even though they're probably like 8-4 or 7-5, not as good as they normally were.
Yeah, Edgerrin James. That was and like you say, that game was made up from an earlier cancellation. So that
due to a hurricane
was a regular season game played on championship weekend. So we had championship weekend with all these crazy results, and the dominoes were falling. I was actually at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta covering Mississippi State. I was at the SEC championship game in the press box, and an Ohio State fan, but I got to keep that, suppressed. I'm covering the SEC, but I'm an Ohio State fan. And that day, yes, UCLA lost. They were in front of Ohio State. Kansas State was upset by Texas A&M in the Big 12 championship game, and Ohio State needed one more domino to fall. And Tennessee was losing in the fourth quarter to Mississippi State, but Peerless Price and T. Martin pulled it out, and Tennessee moved on.
I can see Brad just like hearing the different player names.
T. Martin, I'm sorry about T. Martin, former receivers coach at USC. I mean, he was one of the best, hottest recruiters at one point, like 5 years ago in the country. Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy name. The year after Peyton Manning leaves, they go out and win a national title. I think always, whenever that happens, that's hilarious.
So Mark, when you're setting up the book, was it something like you're like, okay, I remember 98 really well. Like, let me just go like bang out this 98 chapter, or did you start from 90 and work your way up?
Oh, I'm a pretty simple-minded guy. So yeah, I just went through 1990, started with 1990, and it basically, people wonder what it's like to write a book. I'd never written a book and go through the publishing and everything. And actually, I'm not writing War and Peace here, so let's not get it mistaken that this was that difficult to write. So everything involved around the actual writing of the book was the most difficult. It wasn't the actual writing of the book. But I got to admit, yeah, I just kind of like stream of consciousness just wrote all 12 chapters and the 10 chapters of 1990 through 99. Then, of course, I went back, didn't trust myself. That would be stupid to, make sure every score was correct and that what I remembered was correct. But I got a pretty steel trap memory for most of college football history. So 98% of this just came out of my head. But yeah, verified everything. And yeah, it was the difficult portion of this was to work through scenarios and make sure that there wasn't faulty deductions made. I had to kind of review them over and over to make sure, because what I did, guys, and this may interest a few more people to read this, because a lot of people are like, well, that's history and not a history guy. But I didn't want to make it just a history book. So what I did is I took knowing that we're in the process of this sport evolving and continuing to, I took each one of these seasons and I played it out in the future formats. So I took 1990, put it into the BCS, formula and the title game, put it into the 4-team playoff, put it into the 12-team playoff, probably made a mistake, but put it in a 14-team playoff. And what's weird to think of is that in 1990, there were no conference championship games. The SEC started, in 1992. So I actually, was listing, and there's a consideration disclaimer here that it's to an extent impossible to do because you don't know what the schedules would have been, but how they would have been altered. But basically, who would have played in conference championship games and all these. And it's just interesting to see who would have been playing in the Big Ten championship game every year in the 1990s. And then who would have played in the Big Ten. So I do it two ways. Who would have played in the Big Ten championship game and each conference championship game as it stood that year. But I also adjust for realignment and then say, if it was now, who would be playing in the Big Ten championship game in 1993, 94, etc. That's fun. And so there's a full rundown of who would have made the playoff in every year in the different the formats that followed. So you've got some crazy group of 5 representatives. You got Colorado State, you got East Carolina, Southern Miss making the playoffs. And, as you guys mentioned, UCLA was a really good team through much of this decade, specifically 1998. So people that have been college football fans for 5 or 10 years, they'd be surprised who was good and who wasn't good back then and who pops up. And then I stayed true to the format of we're going to give the top seeds to the conference champions. And that really changes things because you had just so many more independent teams at the outset of the decade, man. Practically everybody was an independent. Miami, Florida State, Louisville, Syracuse, West Virginia, Penn State, Notre Dame. All these teams were in. South Carolina was an independent. And so it's funny to see like teams get thrown to the back of the line as an independent that were, let's say, undefeated. And you got the old Southwest Conference, and to throw them into the mix. That was what was the most fun for me, is to take all these hypothetical situations.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Looking at, history in the past, like seeing the evolvement of the different conferences, it's pretty fascinating to kind of see, like Virginia Tech in the Big East way back in their day. And kind of seeing, I had a big encyclopedia myself that I kind of ran through as a child to kind of catch up on everything I missed before I was born, back in the day. And another thing I would do was there's a site called What If Sports, and basically you can run like simulations of different teams in different years. So like you can run like 1992 Virginia Tech versus Ohio State 2002 or something like that. You can have them simulate how that game would go. And yeah, it's really fascinating to run through all the different scenarios. So I totally feel you on that 100% as an athlete nerd, as you put it myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, if this is checking boxes for you, the link is right below here. Mark's new Future National Champions, College Football's Historical 1990s Reset. You can get it on Amazon. And like, again, if you find yourself like somebody like Brad, like Mark, who's just pouring over box scores, like an absolute junkie for the sport, then you have to go pick up that book.